And then while I'm doing that, can you turn off your video? Because I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And then also Chris McMurray. Chris, I wanted to get to actually showing the dictionary. I didn't get a chance to do that because we're going to launch off into this conversation with Shannon Buerk, who's the CEO of Engage to Learn. Excited to do this. Let me get down to that. And then Shannon, I know you're going to take the slides away from me. Yeah, I had a slide up here for you with your beautiful picture. And there's so much to talk about what you guys are doing. The nation is at critical mass for need to be able to talk to you about what's happening, because they've gone so far in the pandemic with what they had for internal knowledge, and now they need experts. like that's why I'm so excited about Engage to Learn, and why we're hosting you, and why we're excited about this partnership with Engage to Learn. So Shannon, take the screen away from me. Let's have a dynamic conversation. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce Chris McMurray, who is our VP Edu Jedi Leadership, and former assistant superintendent out in Evergreen. So pipe up, Chris. So
Hi there.
You're here.
I'm here.
Yeah.
So thanks. Great conversation.
Yeah. You're going to be providing some additional insight into the things that Shannon says. I'm going to just lurk a little bit.
Fantastic.
And keep myself off of camera, so the spotlight's on Shannon. Shannon, do you need me to stop sharing so you can share?
I think I am good. Here we go. Yeah, I think if I just start sharing, it will make you not share anymore. Yeah, that's what happened. Okay, perfect.
Okay, good. I see your slides too.
See it? Okay, great. And now I see your beautiful picture.
I'll be watching chat for you. So you just let it rip, because this is huge for people.
Oh, great.
We were just talking about it yesterday with Jeff McCoy, this assistant superintendent from Greenville. So this is cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having us. And I think I appreciated the last conversation too, just because this idea of personalization is really important in this conversation about mitigating learning loss. So it's kind of one of those times. I'll just briefly introduce our organization, and thank you for having us, LeiLani and Learning Counsel, because you guys are doing such good work in the way that you frame how to use all this amazing digital, these tools and information and everything that we have available to us in this exciting time in education. Our goal as an organization is that we are essentially a design and implementation partner. So Engage to Learn is not a, we don't have a program. We are a professional learning provider and an implementation partner, but we don't bring in a program. Our mission is just really to help ensure that the neighborhood public school is the first choice for every family. So we want to make sure that those schools are, people have choices, and y'all were just talking about that too. People have choices, and you can tell I am from Texas. I just said y'all. People have choices, and their choices, we want them to choose the neighborhood public school because we know that that's the heartbeat of the community, and that's really what makes a difference. So when we go into work with a school district, that's our focus, is to be, an implementation partner for whatever the vision is of that particular school district. So we'll work with the district and make sure that their vision, whatever they're working on, is clarified, codified, and coached at scale. And so they're able to really see that implementation. We've been doing this for about 10 years, and we've worked with over 200 school districts to do implementations across the district. And we have a team that is really, again, content experts, but also content and program agnostic. So they are experts in different subject areas, but then also 100% Google certified, 100% Apple certified. We know how to utilize every single LMS. So we, our folks can, coach on Canvas, Schoology, Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, every LMS that's out there. We actually have gurus on our team that know how to do that, because our focus really as a team is to help folks kind of manage the digital traffic you were just talking about. We've heard from teachers this year and from coaches and principals that they have more at their fingertips than they ever have. And I think you shared, Lonnie yesterday about, I think it's $718 billion being spent in this space, but they're not always sure what to do with it. And so, part of what we try to do, and actually we hear from the folks that we work with is like, thank you for helping me figure out how to integrate all this in a way that makes sense. And so that's really what we focused on doing, is making sure that all that stuff can be utilized. So we created an idea pad for this session. And so for all of you that are watching, you are welcome to click on this link that'll show up in the chat here in just a second. And you can also just copy the short link here, and there's an idea pad. And so there's lots of resources on that idea pad that include free resources and everything that I'm going to talk to you about today. And so if you want to click on that, that would be great. And then also you are welcome to you can see the idea pad just showed up in the chat. So you can click on the link and be able to go to that and see the resources. And then also, of course, love to hear from you, who you are and where you're from, and what you're hoping to learn about mitigating learning loss today. So if you don't mind sharing. Yes.
Yeah, and Shannon, I wanted to mention, we were going to have with you today,
Yes,
Yolanda Rodriguez, a good friend of ours, who's the CEO of Houston ISD. But, they're experiencing, not even being able to get online and or power up their phones down there. So really what I want to do is just mention that scale. How do you scale everything when you're trying to drive at personalization and manage all this traffic is really what's so important about you and your work and your people that are all experts. So yeah. And then Chris will chime in. Chris, chime in where you want to make comments about the real life, what it was like to scale for you at Evergreen.
Sure.
But I know, Shannon, you have a lot to go through. I just wanted to mention that we're sorry that we couldn't bring Yolanda in.
Yes, she's everyone in Texas is experiencing crazy things like no power for 5 days at a time and no water and pipes bursting and all those great things. So Chris, would love to hear from you though, if you wanted to share a little about how you scaled, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, as things go, and as we sort of dig into the sort of the meat of the discussion today, I'll hop in with some experiences and things that I've learned along the way. I know that everybody on the 2 days of conversations today is working through those scaling issues, and knowing Jeff McCoy and his ability and his team, we've got a lot of great examples. So I'll definitely hop in and ask questions and share my own thinking.
That's great. Well, and I'll go ahead and just say that, that's what in a district like Houston, where Yolanda is the CAO, that was, their goal this year. They have 200,000 kids. So it is quite a large scaling project. And when they came to us as an organization, their question to us was, can you help us scale? And really, we started talking before COVID hit about scaling their literacy initiatives and scaling some of the things that they were trying to do in their district, and just needing some more capacity to make that happen. And so that was the beginning of our conversation with Houston that I think Yolanda would share if she was here, is just that she said, we've got coaches, we've got 200 coaches, we've got 200,000 kids. We're trying to do some things across this district, roll out. And then COVID hit and they had to do more. They had to, obviously roll out remote learning and an LMS that they had been using in secondary across the whole district, as well as new curriculum, et cetera. And so they were feeling those pains, and we were thankful to be their partner for sure.
So Shannon, if I could just hop in, one of the things that we experienced, in terms of learning around scaling ourselves, and with other systems that I've had the pleasure to work with, there's a finite resource available for whatever size system it happens to be, and it's actually the same no matter what size the system is. It's all sort of relative to the size of the system, and it's a percentage. And so the fact that you have X number of coaches for X number of teachers and X number of buildings and X number of students, time is a variable. So the fewer you have in the resource column, the greater your time is going to be for a change. And And so we had conversations around volume knobs, and you could turn up the human resource to compress the time frame. You could turn up the fiscal knob to or resource knob to compress a time frame, or you could imagine that you can only then extend that time based on how you set those other two volume knobs, and that was an interesting discussion to get into with folks who imagined that this thing would just happen, but it doesn't. It can't. So,
well, I really like thinking about those different levers and the fact that, like you said, it's finite, right? All of them are finite, and so which one are you going to, because we talk about a lot of times, if you're going to add something, you have to also take something away, right? It's not like you just can have unlimited of everything. So if you're going to add something, you have to strategically abandon something. And we've been trying to help districts think about what can you take off so that you can scale and so that you can, invest in your human capital, because, at the end of the day, no matter what you put in place, it's what happens between teacher and students, that matters. And that actually has an impact on students. And so how do you, ensure that at least a percentage of what you're doing is turning up the lever on that human capital. I did see the top takeaways from 2020, Lonnie, that you shared yesterday. And I think for us, one of the things that is interesting is this idea, and it's these last two bullets on, whole group teaching. And you were just sharing that in this last session as well. And it's like, we have been in that, factory model for a long time, and we've known that it hasn't worked, and we've been trying to move away from it. But this really exposed it even more than ever, that we have to, that it just does not work for kids to have to wait for direction from a teacher. And there's so much wasted time. And Chris was just talking about, time, and how do you increase time? And I think that's where we've really tried to help school districts focus, is you can bring all, the resources in, but how do you truly manage the time? And it's not through whole group teaching. That's the least effective, least efficient. And then how do you, so we've really focused on two levers. And so I'll just bridge off of what Chris was just sharing. Two levers. One is, how do you really increase learning time for every learner? And to do that, you have to break up the whole group teaching method. And then two, how do you make a more efficient way of supporting teachers through coaching? And for that, we've borrowed a coaching method from businesses who have already figured out that, efficiency is key. And so we've used this evidence-based coaching model where we can coach about 4 times more teachers, 3.7 to be exact, times more teachers utilizing this coaching method, because we've actually taken out observation. So those are the two things that we've really seen to be able to create more efficiency. What we're seeing, of course, as this gap continues to widen, and it's impacting our most vulnerable students the most, and we work a lot in urban districts where those students are, experiencing those gaps, that what we're seeing is that leaders that are, during this time, you can do one of two things. You can zoom in and try to deal with all the logistics, which you have to do. If you stay zoomed in like that, you miss the opportunity to see the big picture and to see the opportunity for change. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Jim Collins' Good to Great. A lot of folks in education have read that book. He wrote that book before the recession before 2008. And then in the recession, a lot of the leaders that he had profiled in that book, those businesses ended up crashing. So then he wrote another book, Great by Choice. And that book actually, really addresses the idea of how do you function as a leader effectively during uncertainty and chaos, which I think we could all say is what we've been experiencing for at least the past year or so. And so what do you do during those times to really come out on top? And so again, here's some of what he shares in that book. I've been referring to that book a lot, and we're seeing a lot of the most effective leaders. We worked with over 40 districts this year, about 43 districts. And we're seeing the most effective leaders use this opportunity to make the right changes And we're seeing them also invest in their people as their most important asset. I mean, that's where we're seeing people lead. And so we're seeing what's working in those changes that they're making being learner-centered approaches, using concept-based units to organize the curriculum, engaging learners and families, not just in here's the activity, but in setting goals and in starting to take over the task management, more autonomy, focusing on mastery in terms instead of like grades and completing activities, and then coaching everyone. And so as Chris mentioned, in the past, really coaching has been like, okay, who needs growth right now, And so that's been kind of the focus. But right now, everyone needs coaching, and teachers are saying, thank you for giving me, my coaching and my therapy all in one, because everyone's talking about SEL for kids. But we also need SEL for adults. All of our teachers, all of our educators are overwhelmed. And so that's critically important. So I would love to, for those of you that are on, if you want to share in the chat other things that you are seeing that are working, it would be great to have your ideas also just shared in the chat, things that you're seeing that are working to help mitigate learning loss, because we know that is a huge concern right now. And then what we're seeing that isn't working in districts is whole group virtual lectures, basically whole group virtual anything, synchronous, whole group is just not working. Random assignments to complete by folks. And then, even this idea of, okay, well, let's just give them adaptive software and put them on the computer. These are things that we're seeing are not working. And Chris, I see you maybe wanting to.
Well, yeah, no, I'm such a super fan of coaching, and having been an instructional coach in a past life, I can't highlight enough your last bullet on that slide, which was everyone gets coached, and that's a mindset shift for a system, and it's uncommon to step into a system that actually has embraced that truthfully. Some will give lip service to it, but there are very few who are designing their system for learning around a learner-centric structure, which includes the adults, right? And so the adults should be operating in similar fashions to how learning is designed for the younger learners as well. And right, we're all humans, and we all learn in essentially the same ways. And so why would we ever assume that we should bring 150 teachers together to sit in a cafeteria to sit and get? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. It's not even on the list of effective strategies. And so to be able to run fast, having a broad-based coaching approach is the only way. It's actually the only way that most of these heavy lift shifts will ever really become standard practice. And so then, yep, I'm just a fan. Sorry.
No, that's great. That's great. I love it. And you're so right. I love what you're saying. This is all about a culture shift, right? And if you don't do the same thing, so essentially we've been modeling, everybody's like, oh, well, we want to personalize the classroom. And so I'm going to jump on the sage on the stage with you and say, look, we can't personalize the classroom until we personalize professional learning, because what we're doing in whole group lecture format for teachers is going to be replicated in the classroom. So we can't blame teachers for not figuring out how to individualize and personalize if at a leadership level, we're not doing the same thing in terms of professional learning for our adult learners. And so making sure that we are personalizing for them, individualizing, and the only way to do that is through coaching.
And it includes administrators. Oftentimes the systems are not designed to address the needs of the administrators. And that's critically important. You can't move forward without that. And in fact, that's where it starts. If you don't start with that behavior and the mindset shift at the top, then getting it to go systemic is really, really difficult. And I haven't seen a system succeed where they didn't start at the top.
That is so true. I like to say that too. It's like, well, what you see in a system is usually a result of what leaders model, mentor, and measure. And so what they model, if they model one-way, meetings, one-way informational meetings, faculty meetings or whole group meetings, then that's, what is going to get put forward. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. it is a shift in the whole system. And it is, I believe, the most important shift. I think the money that we're spending in terms of professional learning and the money that we're spending on technology, is never going to realize the promise that is there for learners until we have a coaching system. I mean, and the research is super clear on this. And I think, let me see, I'm actually going to.
Yeah, Shannon, I just want to say something about the teachers being left to figure it out. So essentially what we've been doing for a century and a half is issuing standards, which used to be textbooks, right? Now they're like, now they're little widgety one sentence standards. And then here's your pacing guide as to where the plot goes on the schedule, right? And now over to you, teacher. Every sixth grade teacher was doing it differently. If they're a math teacher, they got, you got 6 different flavors of math and all these different classrooms, which is fine. But basically what they would design is a whole group lesson and then tweak it mildly for the individual learning disabilities or the individual learners, right? So the true definition of personalization that exists in the consumer markets will never come to education because it's not structured that way. It's not structured for personalization. It's structured on class and grade, not course, which is what higher ed did. But then higher ed kind of screwed it up because they just lectured. So it's very interesting to watch the debacle that is higher ed right now, because it's all about the professor. And what we're saying here, I think, is we kind of got to get away from that sort of cult of personality and really into true personalization. And it starts with the practice of the institution itself with its teachers.
That is so insightful. And really, and that's why I constantly say, this is a systems issue that we have to address at a systems level. And you're so right about the professors. My son is a junior at a top tier university that I will not name. And it's been really interesting to see or hear from him, how they've handled all this as well. Because whenever you have a lecture-based system, it doesn't work. And so what you just described is kind of the heart of how we're seeing if we want to go forward. And there are people that really want to overcome this loss, which some people say, it'll take 5 years to overcome the loss that we have out there. And it certainly will take even longer than that if we stay in the same standards-based system that we currently have. Because the way, going through standard by standard, there's a lot of popular kind of approaches out there that are all about that. And we're never going to be able to overcome the learning loss that way, because you have to have an efficient way to do it. And most of the current solutions require too much time. If you want to go standard by standard, you definitely there's no way to get through them all. And then the second, and then especially if you're doing that in a whole group. And then the other way that people think about, let's overcome learning loss for learners is, let's add tutoring time. Let's extend the school day. Let's extend the school year. Yes, we all have to do that. There's no doubt, to be able to make up some of this time. But even with that, if we don't address tier 1, essentially, which is, what's happening in the classroom, even with those additional time and days, we're not going to be able to address this. And it comes down to what you just shared, Lonnie, which is, how do we think about the standards differently? And we have to think about differentiating and personalizing in a different way than we have in the past. And so this is what we're seeing work again with our districts, kind of these 3 steps. The third one being the coaching that we were talking about, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But these first 2, it's a pretty simple solution, I will say. We've been using this as an organization to help our districts overcome and close achievement gaps for about 10 years now. And during this time, we're seeing it work even better. And it's really based on research, and we'll share, we've talked about this, but we'll share a white paper on the idea of this, how to mitigate learning loss, and share some of the research in there.
Hey,
Lonnie, did you want to add?
Yeah. Hey, Shannon, back up to that last slide. So I just want to say something I think that's really important for people to understand, especially teachers who feel like, oh my gosh, don't change anything else again. But really what you're saying here is the district or the people in charge of a, subject specific pathway select the most important things and then align their resources, which is essentially the core of the lesson plan. Okay. So it's a seizure of the lesson plan to the higher level administration. and then provide implementation support for the teacher. Here's why that's not a big deal for teachers to think, because first of all, they're going to go, don't take away all my power. I want to do all the lesson planning. Get out of my room. But really, that was what was happening with textbooks for over a century. Okay. Then textbooks somehow disappeared mostly, and everybody was on their own for the last 5 years. And now with the pandemic, 50% of the rest of the market joined the fray, and every teacher in America was Googling around trying to find stuff. Literally,
Yes.
or scanning in scraps of old coffee stained textbook as their little thing, right? And it's silly. So all you're saying here is let's go back to what worked, which is a little bit more centralized control, a little bit more. Why? Because we have to unburden teachers.
Yes.
We have to get them more involved in the social emotional lives and high touch point. Because if we don't, I've already had 2 superintendents mention high suicide rates. This is no joke.
Yep.
All over America with kids. And that I will not stand for. And I want people to listen to what you're saying. So I'm going to shut up now.
Well, no, you're making such a good point in terms of the shifting of the roles. And I think, it's a very exciting role for the teacher to not be involved with that. I mean, I'm a former teacher. Everyone on our team was a teacher at one point. I taught high school and then ended up as an assistant superintendent. And as a teacher, I didn't care so much about what the curriculum was. I cared a lot about what the students were. And, there's people that teach content and there's people that teach students. And I remember reading, I'm sure you read this book, Windows on the Future, in like the year 2000. And they described this time that would come in the future for education where teachers would have this exciting role and they would be freed up from the purveyors of information. And they, every kid would have a personal smart agent is what they called it. Now we know what it is. It's, our phone. But back then, we didn't have those. And so they talked about a personal smart agent. And once that happened, the teacher would be freed up for this very exciting role. Like I always like to talk about best and highest use, this very exciting role, really more as a coach. So like Chris was saying, like you've got coaching happening throughout the system. So if we can free up the teacher from some of these things and then allow the teacher to have that role that they really went into education for in the first place. Every teacher went into education to see the ahas and the light bulbs come on. And the way you do that is by working with individual students or small groups and really being able to dig in, not standing up there giving a lecture or sitting at your Zoom computer giving a lecture. So this idea of having district level control and then identifying the high priority standards, scaffolding them and leveling them and aligning the resources and the formative assessment questions, and then providing that out to teachers. I mean, that's where we're going to get the ability to move from a grade or age-based system to, which is really at the heart of inequity, not just during COVID, not just as a result of COVID, but prior to COVID, the idea of being stuck on grade level and on grade level standards. And if you're not able to handle grade level standards, then either, if you're above grade level, you're bored. If you're below grade level, you're remediated. That system is never going to mitigate learning loss. So being able to take the standards, this idea that I'm sharing with you is being able to take the standards. And again, this is true for adult professional learning standards or student standards and saying, okay, how do we differentiate the standards so that there's 4 entry points? And that's really the big, it's a simple concept, but it is a really, really powerful way to break up the, kind of the tier 1 by scaffolding or leveling and creating those 4 unique entry points. So once you do that, and we have a resource that we're going to share with you, I'm sure folks have been out there looking at, okay, how do we shrink down to the high priority standards, cluster those standards, and then leveling them. We have a resource for you to be able to do that. It's a free resource that we're making available to you to be able to share at your district level. We're especially seeing a lot of this learning loss in math, but it's also happening in literacy, and the language acquisition is an issue too. So what this does essentially is breaks up those standards into 4 levels by levels of thinking and allows for a couple of scaffolding levels for folks to get on that. Now, the power of it then is to take those leveled standards, and this is showing it in an LMS. It can be, we have an online system that you can do this in and then drop it into the LMS. We have all the leveled standards actually in there, so you didn't have to level the standards. So they're already in our eSuite platform. But for any state in the nation. But you can take those leveled standards then and take all those great high quality instructional materials, hopefully that your district is providing or that you're providing as a district, not just the things that people are Googling, like you said, Lonnie. It's pretty frightening what people are trying to find out there just because they're desperate to have something to provide to students. But taking all those resources and then aligning those to the level of the standards so that once you get that in place, it's a really autonomous kind of playlist for learners. They can set goals, they can get pre-assessment, and then they can essentially follow the playlist at those levels. And we're seeing this be the key to accelerating learning because no time is wasted. Every student is getting exactly what they need. And you mentioned this in the last session, but instead of 10 people being able to be right where the teacher is at the time, and that's all the only people that are getting, and the other 25 or whatever are kind of waiting for their turn. In this way, every learner at every level is able to go and utilize all those different resources. And so these resources include whether that's some adaptive software that you have, that's choice boards that the teacher has created. Those are other high quality instructional materials, even textbook pieces. As long as they're leveled at these different 4 levels of the standards, then students can basically hit their playlist and go and then level up and essentially level up using formative assessment questions, et cetera. And then that frees up that teacher from the whole group to be able to pull small groups and work with them on small group instruction, pull individuals, do their formative assessments, essentially coach learners on their performance over time. So this is, this idea is the way to truly shift what currently we will never get there with the time that we have allotted to the idea of how to really let kids just fly, take the barriers away, let kids fly. Make sure, if you're sitting in a classroom and you're trying to get on level and all the materials are at the grade level, it's going to, then you're going to have to stay after school because you're not going to get it. But if you scaffold those, we just see we see the biggest gains with students who, struggle the most whenever you put them in the system. So we're seeing like 24 percentage point gains in 1 year when they're able to level up like this. And we really like, a lot of people say, where would you suggest that school district leaders start with shifting to leveled standards? Well, across your entire district. But if you want to do it in stages, I think right now with COVID, what we're seeing is the most important place to start is probably middle school because the high schools tend to be a little bit more differentiated as it is, but the middle level is where we're seeing a lot of learning loss and huge disengagement, as well as a lot more of the other types of struggles that you mentioned. And so starting with this leveled standards idea in middle school is a great place to start. So then the last piece of this is what we've talked a little bit about, but I think as we kind of wrap up, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit more about this supporting folks in this process. So whether you're interested in doing the leveled standards and really shifting the way the classroom works completely in the teacher role and what we've just discussed, whether you're interested in that or not, whatever you're doing right now, you've got to be providing coaching for everyone, like Chris said. And the reason is because no matter what, this was true when we rolled out one-to-one, years ago. This is true when we're rolling out any new technology, any new program, that if you look at the research, essentially in any organization, not just in education, but in any organization, it's about 3 out of 10 folks that when you roll out that new initiative are able to and want to and interested in taking hold of it and running. So about 34%. It's about 53%, that 5 out of 10 that are kind of waiting. And in education, they're waiting because they know the program's going to change. As soon as you roll out this program, then a year later, you're going to roll out this next one. And so they just want to wait and see what's going to happen. And then you've got about 13% or 2 out of 10 approximately that are actively sabotaging. I remember being a first-year teacher and I wouldn't go into the teacher's lounge because there were teachers in there that were just like essentially saying like, whatever it was that we were doing at the time, don't buy into this, it's just going to change. And they were actively sabotaging it. So the only way to truly shift the culture of education as a whole, an individual school or a district, is to make sure that the investment that we're putting into teacher development is not going into training. And
hey Shannon, we have a comment from Lynn. Lynn, I think you're unmuted now if you want to ask your question or make your comment.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, oops. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Oh, so I'm a standards developer actually for the WIDA consortium, and we
Okay.
do standards for multilingual learners. So we're in basically 40 state education agencies, territories. And
Oh, wow.
so these are the kids who are English for additional language or English
Yeah.
as a new language,
Mhm.
ESL kids.
Yeah, we
And
work with a lot of ELL, and actually they benefit greatly from this approach. ELL students, because we work in a lot of Texas districts who have high English language learner populations, and they benefit greatly from this. So yeah,
I would totally agree. Oh, I apologize.
No, good.
And because the big thing that we find is that folks give modifications, which are lower, watered down expectations and not scaffolding. So I love what you're doing. And I just put in the chat box, like if you, sorry for the image, it's working off an iPad, but if just the image of equity. And it's not that you're lowering the standard, but I love the whole part that you're talking about, because you're just nailing the fact that it's not modifications, it's scaffolding. That's at the heart of it. So,
Oh,
and we're
thank
trying
you.
to align we've just put out new standards to align to across all the standards. We go across math, science, ELA, and social studies. And so you have to find like the most prominent expectations. So I'm just totally loving what you're saying. So sorry.
No, that's great. That's great. And that's great feedback. And I love what you just said, because I think that a lot of people think about differentiation like you just described. They set okay, here's the lesson, and it's the same lesson for everyone. And then, as they've created the same lesson for everyone, down at the bottom, you see this opportunity for, what are the modifications going to be for your English language learners? What are the modifications going to be for, students with this particular need, et cetera? And that's not how you differentiate, because then what's happening is the main lesson is not truly differentiated. So I love what you're saying. We don't need to modify. If we will break it up in the first place, it really allows entry points for every single learner, and they will fly through this. That's what is so exciting when we do this work. They fly through this. They get on level 1. They set goals for themselves, so it creates autonomy and student agency. And then they just start, they just start going through it. And it's like, oh, I finished this one. I did this. And, that formative assessment, I'm ready for this next level. And it's pretty exciting to see. And the language acquisition that happens because of the fact that they're engaging with the standards, engaging with the teacher, engaging with their peers during the process, they're truly acquiring a lot more language even in the process. So appreciate your feedback for sure. And Chris, it looks like you want to say
Shannon. No, just listening, and it's fascinating because what I find that as I listen to more professionals talking about this shift to a real shift to personalization, not just sort of a play shift, it's highlighting some fairly deep misconceptions and gaps in understanding relative to teaching practice. And those are centered around differentiation and just the fact that we're trying to define scaffolding for people. That's a little scary to me. If we're not understanding what scaffolding is and are adept at not only differentiating but individualizing, much less personalizing, then it's a long road. It's going to be a long road, and you're not ever going to get there unless you have coaches. It just won't happen. Yes. And it's daunting to me, but it's also heartening that this is now common vocabulary, and it's woven into the vernacular more so now than it has been.
Well, and I think your point is really important. People say personalization or individualization or differentiation, and they mean a lot of different things. And so, I think it's really important to say, look, if we're going to differentiate, it needs to be in tier 1 for everyone. It needs to be in that first teach for everyone, not as a remediation, not as an intervention, but in first teach for everyone. And if you break it up right, according to the standards, like we're talking about, you'll give those entry points, scaffolding or extension, even if you think of it shouldn't mean more work on the same topic, right? It should actually mean a different level of thinking so that you can scaffold up the level of thinking. And so I think those terms and the way we do that are really, really important. We actually worked with Apple because we had worked with them in several school districts, being the implementation partner, and they started seeing some of this work. And so they came to us this summer and said, hey, why don't you develop some of this into an app? So we actually developed this app that is called IndyPath, which is individualized differentiated pathways. And it has, and it's used on the iPad. And so essentially, it has all the accessibility features for non-readers, for English language learners, so that essentially it sets it up for them to guide their learning, again, using all the same resources and everything that districts have already been providing, those high quality instructional materials, but just organizing them in such a way that students can access them and then be able to level up and guide their own learning. So love that. I just wanted to throw that in there because of hearing y'all talk about that, and love that the work that it sounds like you're doing, Lynn, which is great for those learners, because it is important to work on those standards at that, higher level and provide that. It is crazy to think of teachers doing this individually, right? I mean, although they do, and we have worked in districts where that's, teachers can do it individually. It's not impossible for them to do, but to do that at the higher levels and provide that support and then free them up to really coach their learners, I think is really important.
Yeah. Hey, Shannon, this is LeiLani again. This is so funny because I've been talking now for over a year about, 2 years, about how school districts and the curriculum leaders need to quote unquote lay all the bricks, which is exactly what you're teaching districts to do. And it doesn't mean that it takes the teacher's job away. It means it brings it back to what is now almost ancient history of the textbook days, right? In a digital way.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know why more district leaders aren't grasping that. It's literally like we talking to them, and they consider that the district's leadership's job is, in general, just the pacing guides. And pacing guides are mostly defined because we did a project. We looked at all pacing guides all across America over the summer. Yes. Pacing guides are mostly just when to teach the standards on the calendar. Mm-hmm. They're not like actually doing this work of scaffolding them and, creating playlists. You're not talking about flat digital resources either, just PDFs and Google Docs. No. You're talking about, okay, now plot in, Achieve 3000 here and plot in this over there, and then use our system, Engage to Learn over here. You're not talking about like, let's undigitize things, right? Like, no. You're talking about the order of pace, but not necessarily competency, which I think is a critical differentiator, because you don't have to have all competency-based learning. That's not what we did in the classroom, and it scares people to think everything's going to be competency-based. It can be pace alone. And some of this is competency, obviously, right? But this is interesting because basically what you're saying, and it's so mirroring what we've been saying, is logistics of how to get the job done is coming. And you have to do it, or you are not going to be competitive.
Right. Right. And I heard you say, this is going to happen, and it is going to happen. It's going to happen whether people want it to or not. But the things that people are afraid of, which I hear you saying, and I agree, are not, again, we've been doing this for 10 years. So we've been seeing it in districts. The teacher's role is not reduced, it's enhanced. And they're not following a script. Now that's a whole different thing, right? When districts are creating a curriculum that teachers are following a script. And the reason why that's not good is because then the teacher following the script from the district doesn't know when to do intervention, doesn't know how to do formative assessment, can't individualize for learners because they didn't create the script. This is very different. It is taking the standards, which we all have to follow, giving access to the standards to the students by leveling them, and then aligning your resources to that. So yeah, you're still able to use all those high-powered resources. It's very digitized. And but it organizes all that in a way that's accessible, not just by the teacher, so that learners are dependent on the teacher, but by the learner, so that the learners are being able to direct their own learning and utilize and access all those resources, which frees the teacher up again to do the coaching and to really help them and to, formatively assess and find the myths that, whatever they might be thinking that's, a little off base and help to correct that and work with them in small groups. I mean, all the things that teachers love to do and are really good at doing, that truly accelerates learning. So you basically can have, the tutoring, if you will, in tier 1, because everyone's busy. In these classrooms that we've been working in, you literally, if you have a substitute that day, you can walk in those classrooms and every learner is still working. Like the subs just, okay, there's no video to show because the learners all know where they're going. They know what they're doing and they're following their playlists. It's fabulous. So I really appreciate the interaction and the conversation, because I get super excited about this, because I do feel like it's like, this is the wave of the future. This is the way. Our team calls this the Buerk rubric when you create one of these, which I appreciate. They're like, it's going to be like the Gantt chart, but I really do feel like it's a pretty simple. It's not easy, but we do have a 180-day plan also, by the way, for anyone who's trying to work on this at a district level, or even like someone like Lynn that's working at a systems level. We do have a 180-day plan that you can follow to do it. And we're also more than willing to, provide a free consult to work with you on it, because we're just so passionate about us switching, flipping the switch on education, freeing up teachers, the overwhelm there, and mitigating learning loss for learners. And to kind of to talk about that support piece, I just do want to say, can we quit doing training? Because training transfers to practice 0% of the time. So all those great technology pieces that people are rolling out and then they're training people on it, literally that is a waste of time and money. That coaching is the only way to make this work. And the research is very clear on this, 95% transfer. This study by Brown University says it too, that the effects on student achievement are larger than all other school-based interventions combined when you use coaching. It's better than providing incentives, training, merit-based pay, all those other, even extending learning time, if we just coach people through this. So that's the last piece of this, is making sure that we're providing support for change, we're coaching them through it, and so that they can integrate everything in. And again, if you use an evidence-based coaching model, you can do that also very quickly. You do not have to do observation and create more compliance and kind of watch what they're doing. You can actually have them bring evidence of practice, and we have a system for that. So I'll just share, if you're trying to work on this, first of all, I'll say we're here to help. We can, do a free consult, help with whatever you're trying to work on, because we really feel, again, passionate about helping educators, first of all, utilize all the great things that people are already doing, and, making sure that all the resources, the investment, everything that people have put in this year really makes the difference for folks. And so that's one way. Then the other thing I would say is, thinking about which level you're supporting in this process of mitigating learning loss. And we've been talking about different ways, but what are you providing to students? Let's not forget that not just tutoring, not those things, but how are you allowing students to access their own pathways and take a more active, engaging role. It's basically integrated SEL, et cetera, into the process, because when they're setting goals, which we know, by the way, student goal setting is one of the number one ways of increasing student achievement. So putting the driver, putting the students in control of their own learning, and then making sure that teachers are supported in the process. As I mentioned, we do have the standards leveled in our online system. And so that's available. But if you do this at a district or systems level and provide that support to teachers, making sure you're leveling those standards is important. And then coaching support, making sure that the coaches understand how to coach on this, and that coaching is happening throughout the system for every person. So I think I want to just answer any other questions. I can go into detail on any of those pieces that we've shared, but what other questions would folks have that I want to make sure that I'm addressing before we're...
Yeah, there was a comment in here from Luz Miranda Valencia. If we can unmute Luz, Doug, please. Okay. So you can make your comment, Luz. I don't even know if I'm saying your name right, but I hope I am. And then, of course, I have more comments, and probably so does Chris. And I'm super excited about you, and I feel like I'm your new best friend, and I just want to help you.
We're so aligned in our thinking. I know. I'm like, oh, wow, this is so cool. Luz, what was your question or comment?
not sure if I'm seeing that person or,
I see the name.
okay.
Still muted though.
Ask to unmute, yeah. I'm not sure if Luz will unmute or not,
Oh,
but
there she goes.
Hello. Nice to have heard you, to attended you. I see that teachers, referring to good teachers, have always been aware of the needs of the students, and that nowadays we have these, in some way, sorry for the word, catastrophical change due to the pandemic. And so all of us have been really surprised and astonished for this change. And so your presentation is very useful to be aware of how we can use hardware. And I am thankful for that. However, teachers are experts in the needs, good teachers. They detect well the needs of their students. That's what I wanted to say, and to congratulate you for being aware of this need of having more availability in the hardware. That's very useful for us. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that comment, Luz. And you're so right. I think that is what is so important is teachers do know the needs of their students. They're able to detect that. I think that's one of the stresses that has, the change that you mentioned and the stress that teachers have been under is they see more than any, we see that from the research, they see more than anyone the needs of their students, and that they're so stressed about the learning loss and what they're seeing. I actually was on a panel listening to an equity panel, and a superintendent mentioned, he said one of the things that's been so difficult for teachers during this time and for administrators is because of Zoom and because of we're looking into the lives of our learners more than ever, which is a good thing in terms of understanding it. But it's been stressful because he said, we're seeing more of the needs than we ever had. We're hearing the kids getting yelled at. We're seeing, what they're dealing with at times and what they're overcoming to be able to, complete their homework or do their, try to address their academic goals. And it's stressful for teachers to see that because they care so much for learners and they see that the needs that they have. And so I think it is critically important for folks like Lynn and others who are in systems roles to be able to truly support that through, teachers are being left to, like LeiLani said, to search for things online instead of, being able to have those things given to them. And I think that the leaders that are, and leaders are desperate too. I mean, I'm on the phone or on a hangout with, I was with the chief of staff from Dallas ISD yesterday, and she was just saying the cognitive load from everything that leaders are. So we need a simple solution because everyone is trying so hard. Everyone is spending, I know there's leaders that haven't taken a day off since, spring break started last year. And so a year ago. And so it's just, it's been very hard on the whole system. So if we can have a simple answer, I think that's great. And Angela, I see that you're here and you have a comment as well.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this session and the great questions that are being asked. And it's a comment that may turn into a question. I work up in central office and I'm just anticipating moving leadership to a coaching model for PD versus training. And I know it's going to be efficient, fast. We can put 150 people on a Zoom and do it. And yet we know it's not best. And we know that coaching doesn't always have to look like a one-on-one to work either. But I'm anticipating how to move the leadership to understanding or accepting, because I think they know it's a good thing, this PD model of training to coaching.
Well, I love where your head's at with that, Angela. And if I were in a district today, I mean, I was an assistant soup before, and if I were in a district today, I would absolutely move and because I think it's the most critical role, and it is the way to truly see growth in the system. And so, one, how to move them. I think, research showing that this is what works, because everyone that's in leadership, just like teachers for students, everyone that's in leadership wants to do what is going to be the best thing to most effectively support teachers and principals. And so, we've worked with districts who have done that. We've worked with districts who have started to blur the lines between, instructional technology coaches, instructional coaches, curriculum developers. Everyone becomes a coach, and even campus leaders. And we are working in a district right now where next year, what they're going to do is have every principal and assistant principal essentially become a coach. Now, will they have some management things in the building? Yes, but they're gonna start coaching. And so, I love where your head's at with that. I would strongly suggest an evidence-based coaching conversation model. We use the GROW model, again, that is, from industry, and Google uses this model. And it's an evidence-based model where essentially, you ask them to set goals. It's a conversation that you have that around the adult learner's goal setting. And then you go through the process of options and sharing with that. You don't have to know the content to do it, because you can ask the right questions, and then provide resources. And then it's based on evidence. So that adult learner brings evidence back to that next conversation. It's a lot quicker. Like I mentioned before, using this model, we can coach 3.7 times more people. So one of the fears, I think, whenever you're moving to this is the time it's going to take. But we've proven out this coaching capacity formula with using this model, where essentially at even 25% coaching time, just dedicating 25% of the time to these coaching conversations, you can coach 25 or more teachers, and then it goes up from there. So we have folks that can coach, 100 people in a fraction of their time, because the more you're coaching, actually, the more efficient it gets. And so I love that conversation. I would be glad to work with you and just as a thought partner and think through, how to roll that out, kind of a responsible rollout, and how to help them understand the value. But what we're seeing when folks are going to this, and this is happening in Houston ISD, where Yolanda was going to be with us today, they've created something called teacher development specialists. And then they have folks at their kind of curriculum area that are moving into these roles, as well as teachers moving into these roles. And I think she would say that it's been, very, very valuable as people go into those roles. They get the same reward. They start to love that even more, because they're getting that same reward of getting closer to the classroom again, seeing the ahas, and really seeing the growth. And I think that's where, that's where that's why every educator came into the business, right? Is to be able to see that growth. And so, I would be glad to share with you, or also connect you to a couple other leaders who have moved in this direction also.
Thank you. That was helpful. And I love that the chart you have here has the word will in there. Many charts don't include willingness to do it, right? We always just assume the person being coached wants to, and gauging their either preparation for it or their mindset or attitude is key. I love that.
Well, that's great that you keyed in on that, Angela, because I think that's part of this process is like, and we have an online platform that supports this, because when you put those options out there, then you want them to select from the options and then decide even, okay, here's the evidence I'm going to bring back to the next conversation. If they're making that decision, you move from a compliance-based model, right, to an autonomous, like I'm in charge of my own professional learning, just like we want learners to be in charge of their learning. So giving them that opportunity, just like you're saying, and you keyed in on, to, choose options then that they're going to implement, and then bring that evidence back, choose the evidence they want to share back with their coach, essentially puts that ball in their court. And I think that's really important for us to get, to end up with learning organizations. So love that you keyed in on that.
So Shannon, can I jump in on this one? Because I have experienced moving, sort of like Angela is talking about, moving administrators into sort of more coaching roles. And what we understand is that a lot of administrators haven't really experienced real coaching, in their career. have an idea of what coaching is that is not accurate, and it's actually detrimental to any sort of administrative movement to a culture of coaching. And I always applaud people who want to do that, and then in the same breath caution them to not go into the conversation without doing a considerable amount of work learning about what coaching is and is not, and then relying and leaning heavily on this type of model. And so get partners, find people who do this successfully, who can help you through, because there's the downside of that is to move into a culture of coaching which is not accurate and not effective, and then you're doing damage control. You may be doing more harm than good, and that's hard to come back from, because then you've tainted the idea of coaching again, and it's really difficult to get the trust back. And so I absolutely applaud systems who are moving in that direction, but like you said, Shannon, research for sure, back it with research, and absolutely take time to learn about it before you step in.
That's really good caution, Chris. Again, like everything else in education, coaching has a lot of different, connotations for folks because of how it's been used in the past. And in some cases, it's been used, again, as kind of like a gotcha. And that's where, people get afraid of it. And so it does take a little time in terms of, sharing the research. In some districts, we've even called it something different, just to get over that hump. But as soon as people really understand it, and coaching at every level of the system and seeing the growth that happens from it, it is very, very powerful to have a culture of coaching. I believe that is the key to us really moving into this next generation of education, because things are going to change again. We weren't expecting what happened this last year, and no one can predict. If they say they can, they're crazy. No one can predict what the next 10 years is going to look like. What we do know is that things are going to change. We can predict that. And the only way to get through those changes, as leaders, as educators, and to get through them effectively is with coaching. And so, because that's where you're going to find your ability to adapt to the change. And so we know that, and again, it's not because everyone needs a coach. It's not because people don't have great ideas. They do. A lot of it is about that integration piece and how to make that work right. So really appreciate the conversation with everyone today. It's been great.
Yeah. Hey, this has been awesome. Okay, so I think we're rounding off on just 1 minute left with you. And then Chris is going to take over for the workshop on the new digital learning experience standards and the dictionary definitions workshop. Please stay, Shannon. And then we've already had Dr. Nesbitt join us. So she'll be speaking from 2:30 to 3 p.m. But she, I think she's listened to some of what you said, Shannon. So we can ask. But I love it. I love your work. I think of it in the Uberization vein of learning. How do we Uberize learning? How do we make a precision thing happen with teaching rather than overburden them in a time when it's just wild out there? So I'm excited about you.
Thanks. I'm excited about you and this organization and everything that you all do, because it's super refreshing. It's exactly what education needs. So thank you for your leadership and for having us today. And yeah, you got some powerful people on here.
Yes.
So yeah.
And super cool. And Dr. Nesbitt's super awesome. And I can't wait for her to speak later. So we're going to have Chris go. And then Dr. Don Phillips, superintendent of Caldwell County Schools, with his assistant superintendent, Dr. Katrina McEllen, are going to go for half an hour. We'll show one video in the middle of all that. But thank you for being with us. Stay on. You can lurk in the background and make more comments throughout the rest of the day. At the end of the day, we also have Dr. Sean Johnson, superintendent of Clarendon School 2, which is one of my favorite districts in America. So excited for all of that.